Hello, my name is Roy Davis. Welcome to the International Kitchen. And today we're going to be experimenting and having fun with American cuisine. We've got 3 dishes prepared for you today. First dish is we're going to prepare a traditional American meatloaf. Meatloaves are prepared all over the world. It's definite to say that everyone has a little bit of their own spin on making meatloaf. America is got their own way too. So we're going to show you how to do that today. We're also going to make some creamy mashed potatoes with garlic, and this is going to be our complement to our meatloaf today. And then on top of that, we're going to make some honey glazed carrots. And right off the bat, I like to talk about some of the seasonings we're going to be using today. With our meatloaf, traditional tastes and seasonings that we use in the United States for cooking, we're putting our flavors into our food, are very multicultural. Most of the seasonings that we use are not considered truly American because they come from all over the world. But the way we use them and the way we mix them together, it makes them very much American. So some of the seasonings we're going to be using today is we're going to make a mixture of basil and tarragon and regan, which is oregano in American, and some thyme. And let's see, I think I was missing some thyme here. Here we go, we got our thyme. And we're going to mix these in equal portions together, and we're going to mix this into our meatloaf. And why don't we go ahead and we get started doing that. So I'm going to grab my bowl here, and I'm going to, since we're going to be touching the meat with our hands, I'm going to use some rubber gloves here because it's kind of mushy and ooey and gooey. And we are going to get our meat into the oven. Now the first thing we need to do, even before we start preparing, is to get our oven set to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which in Celsius is about 178. So prior to the show, we got our oven nice and hot, and our oven's ready to go. And we're going to get this meatloaf prepared and get it into the oven. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our ground beef. Now, ground beef comes in all different grades in the United States. Most ground beef comes in what we call grade A ground beef, which basically means that it's the content of fat that's in the beef. Here in Albania, we don't really have a choice of what type of grade of meat that we're going to buy. So a typical ground beef, wherever you want to buy it, at any one of the stores. Conad is one of the stores where we buy our goods, and they usually have pretty good grade of ground beef. So we're going to take our ground beef and we're going to put it here into our bowl, like this. Okay. Once we get that done, we're going to jump right into our spices. We want to get our spices lined up here because each one of our spices that's going to go into our mixture here should be infused. So you want to infuse the spices into the mixture because you want the spices to soak up into the meat. Now, for the spices, you want to be able to have equal portions. In this particular recipe, we're going to use 1 equal portion of each. Now, I like to use measuring spoons. And since we're in Albania, and this is not America, you're used to using milliliters. I'm used to using the standard system, which is a quarter tablespoon and a half tablespoon. Just by size and look, you can tell that it's very similar. You can find spoons that actually have, if you can zoom in here and see, that say this is a half a tablespoon, but it also says in the metric system it's 2.5 milliliters. So when I refer to something in a quarter tablespoon or half a tablespoon, you can go online, you can go on the internet, and you can use a simple calculator to calculate what those portions are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a half a teaspoon, and I'm going to use a half a teaspoon of each one of these seasonings. And we're going to start here with the oregano, and I'm going to get it in here. Then we're going to jump to the marjoram. And you'll see I kind of level it off so that it's not too much, it's not too little, it's just leveled off. So we're gonna get that in there too. And I'm gonna tell you a little secret too about these four seasonings just in a moment. I also am putting tarragon into this. This is not a typical Albanian type of seasoning, but in the United States we love tarragon because it's a very sweet aromatic seasoning, and it mixes well with all other seasonings. Now, ironically, you can find tarragon at just about any kind of store here. When you when you have a recipe that calls for it, you can find it, and you can go out to a Conad or one of your local shops, and you should be able to find them. The last one the second to the last one we're gonna get in here is actually our basil. We got to get our basil in here. You notice that I smelled that, right? I can smell and tell which ones they are. Tarragon, it's very sweet smelling. The marjoram, it's a very kind of rough smelling seasoning. And then the oregano is, it's Regan. You can't mistake that smell. But the last seasoning we're going to put in here is thyme. And thyme is very closely related to rosemary. It has a very similar type of aroma to rosemary. Now, rosemary grows wild everywhere in Albania, and I just love that because in the United States it's incredibly difficult to find rosemary that's fresh. And if you do find it, it's very expensive. Here, it grows wild everywhere. So we're going to use a little bit of thyme here, and I'm going to do the same portions. I'm going to do about, if I can get it in here, we're going to do about half a teaspoon of thyme. I think I got some of it that just kind of fell over. You know what? How about we do that? I like thyme anyway, so we'll use a little bit more. So here we have our seasonings in our mixture. Why it's important to put the seasonings in first is because before you actually put the binding and start pushing all this together and start binding it together, you actually want those seasonings to get into the meat. And if you put the other stuff on top first, the seasonings won't actually get into the meat. So the next thing we're going to do in this recipe is we're going to use about, again, measuring cups. We're going to use about a 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs. Now, the breadcrumbs is also used as a binding agent. If I can get it out here. Okay. You can see that's about a level quarter cup of breadcrumbs, and we're going to put this in here because that's going to help bind all that together. But we got one more binding agent that's got to go into that, and that other binding agent is going to be eggs. So now that we've got our seasonings and we've got our breadcrumbs, okay, you can also use sliced bread in this. In America, most families, very typical, well, they take a couple slices of bread, and maybe it might be a piece of bread that you had left over from the day before, or even fresh bread. I mean, a good piece of fresh bread will even spice it up a little bit better. But they take it and they break it up into the little small pieces in their hand, and they'll put it in there. I'm actually using breadcrumbs here because breadcrumbs actually give it a more smoother texture when it's baking in the oven. So now that we've got our seasonings and our breadcrumbs, we're going to go over here and we're going to have a little bit of garlic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one garlic here, and I'm going to grab my chopping knife, and I'm going to take off the little green end, and we're going to smash our garlic here with the top of our knife. You want to hold the knife closely down level to your cutting block because you do not want to have this on the side. You might cut yourself. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our knife on top of there, and we're going to give it one small crack. And you'll see what it does is it basically opens up the garlic and lets all the flavor out instantly. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to chop this up a little bit, and we're going to kind of chop it fine, and just so a few fine pieces. Now I'm using one head of garlic. Some people really enjoy actually putting 2 or 3 heads of garlic. I find that one head of garlic gives it just enough of flavor that you don't have to overdo it with the garlic taste. Although people who are garlic lovers are going to just put as much garlic in there as they want. So now we've got our garlic going there. We're going to pick our garlic up, get it in there. Now you can use powdered garlic, but fresh garlic is much better. It's going to be more aromatic. It's going to give you a much broader, deeper taste than powdered garlic. When you're in a hurry and you don't have garlic on hand, use powdered garlic. It's very good. Okay, so now that we've got our seasonings and our garlic and our breadcrumbs, the next thing we're going to do is put a little bit of pepper and salt. So let's see, where's my salt at? Here's my pepper. And we're going to put a little bit of pepper in here, and fresh ground pepper is the best. You get just enough in there to flavor it up. It doesn't have to go overboard on the flavor. We're a pepper nation in America. We love pepper on everything. We love pepper on our eggs. We love pepper on our steaks. We love pepper on all our food. Well, it's hard to not cook without pepper, so. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a little pinch of salt in here. And the salt, maybe a couple pinches of salt, just to help blend the flavors. Now, salt's very important because salt will help pull out all the rest of the flavors when they are infused. It's also, salt is a stabilizer, so it will help stabilize all the smells and everything that's going to come out of this food. So, our next thing to do is we're going to use a couple of eggs here. And now that we've got our salt, pepper, seasonings, breadcrumbs, and garlic, we're going to put a couple of eggs in here to go with the breadcrumbs, and this is going to be our binding agent. And the binding agent is what's going to help hold this thing together when we form it and put it in our pan. Okay, now we got all that in there. We've got our gloves on. Here's the fun part. We get to get our hands in here and get it all ooey and gooey and just smush it all up. Now the key to this is to make sure that this is mixed incredibly well. So sometimes you could spend 2 or 3 minutes sitting here mixing it to get all these flavors infused with one another. And you can tell, if you can see it there, it almost kind of looks like a pate at this moment. And it's going to stay a little bit. You can see all the egg that's mixed in it real good. And it's going to stay kind of looking like a pate while it's in the oven. So now that we've got this pretty well mixed and all of those seasonings and everything deep down inside, we're going to take this and we're going to get it into our baking dish. Okay, I think we got one baking dish here that will work. Now, lots of people when making meatloaf, they like to take their meatloaf and basically just push it down into the pan. I don't like to do that. I like to be a little bit more creative. So when the meatloaf is in the pan and you're cutting it, once it's done, it kind of sticks to the edge of the pan. Well, something my mother taught me when I was young is that when you make meatloaf, you never let it touch the sides of the pan. And when I asked my mom why we did that, it was mostly because she said it looked prettier. Now that's pretty funny because when you're cooking, okay, well, some people look at cooking as, okay, cooking is for eating, it doesn't have to look pretty. Well, yeah, it's more pleasant when you're, basically when you're eating something that looks pretty when it first comes to the table. And if it looks really pretty, it's even more enjoyable to eat. So now, you'll see that I have my kind of ball of meat here. And I'm gonna get this in my baking dish. Now, typically in the baking dish, you can put a little bit of oil, you can put a little bit of butter if you want. Oil's the best, but I'm not going to put any in this one because I want the bottom of this, as it's cooking, to actually blacken a little bit hard. Most people don't actually enjoy their meatloaf blackened on the bottom. I found that it actually gives it a little bit nice flavor. Even if you don't eat the whole bottom portion of the meatloaf because it's a little burnt, it helps pull out a lot of the flavor from all of the infused ingredients. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to flatten this out, and as we're flattening it out here, we're going to you can make any kind of shape you want, but the typical meatloaf shape is kind of oblong. So you got an oblong shape. And that's mostly so that you can cut it and put it into slices. When you serve it on a plate with the rest of your foods, it will basically set down, and it's a nice presentation. But the other nice thing about this is that we're also, in America, we are also the nation of leftovers. We don't let any food go to waste. Basically, I mean, if you go to a restaurant and you have a steak dinner and you don't eat your entire steak for the meal, you put it in a doggy bag and you take it home and you eat it later. Well, this is the same thing with leftovers with home-cooked food too, because the leftovers with home-cooked food, we like to make sandwiches with them. This is something definitely not typical in Albania, and this is something that you might want to try. Because when you have leftovers of your meats, then you can take and slice your meats the day after and make a sandwich out of it. You take it, put it on a piece of bread, put a little bit of mayonnaise on it, and eat it like a sandwich. Shumë mirë, I believe the term is, for Albanian, for very good. And I absolutely enjoy leftovers. Now this is starting to look pretty good. I'm gonna center it a little bit here in my pan. And you can see that basically it does not touch the sides of the pan. And you don't, in this case, I don't want it to, because I want it to be a little bit blackened and I want it to be soft in the sides. So now we're just about ready to take this and get it in the oven. So we have our oven preheated to 175 degrees C right now, and we're going to put this in the oven for approximately an hour. But in 30 minutes time, we're going to take it out of the oven and we're going to put a glaze over it. And we're going to start the glaze in a moment. But we're going to get this in the oven right now and get that working. So, okay, now that we've got that in the oven, we're going to get to our next thing. And the next thing we need to do is we need to get our potatoes on for making our mashed potatoes. So we've already pre-cut some potatoes here that we're going to use. I'm going to finish the last one real quick to get it in the oven. Basically, you chop your potatoes into maybe 1 inch, let's say 20 centimeter, 10 centimeter pieces, so that they cook quickly. Now, this is not for a potato salad or anything else. We're making mashed potatoes, so it doesn't matter how the potatoes are going to look. So you can make them just about any size that you like. Okay, now that we've got our potatoes chopped, we're going to go over here and get our potatoes inside of our pot. Okay, and we're going to get some water on it. We need to cover these. And I think we just about have enough of water there just to get these going. So you just want to cover them right over to the top. Maybe put a little bit more water there. Okay. And we're going to get our stove turned on here. Okay. And we're going to kind of cook them quick, because the mashed potatoes, once we take the potatoes off the stove and we start to mix them with our ingredients, it's actually going to stay warm. It's not going to get cold. You need to kind of watch the preparation time. From the oven, an hour baking time for the meatloaf. And in 30 minutes, we're going to put a glaze on it. But the potatoes, you can start them, say, maybe 20, 30 minutes before your dish is actually done, because it doesn't take long to make mashed potatoes. The ingredients is a preparation time for all of the meals that we're preparing today is about 30 minutes. So it takes about 30 minutes to put all of these things together, to prepare them before you can actually start cooking. So the next thing, now we got our potatoes on. We don't want to forget our salt, because a little bit of salt in our potatoes is going to help pull out that starch in the potatoes. And we all should be concerned about starch, because starch in our foods can actually help lead to diabetes, and you don't want to have to go down that road. So now that we've got that going, we're going to go ahead and get our carrots going. And let's see, I think I'm going to need another pot here. we're going to get another pot. Now, on our carrot recipe, basically what we're doing is we're going to make what's called a honey glazed carrots. And what that consists of is cooking the carrots, cooking them for 5-6 minutes really hard, getting them slightly soft. And then we're going to add to it some Dijon mustard and some honey, okay? And we're going to cook them real slowly and with a little bit of thyme, okay? Our thyme here, which we talked about. And we're going to cook them slowly and let a glaze form on them. So let's get those carrots in our pot. We've got half of them chopped here. We'll finish chopping the rest. Now, you can make, in America, this particular recipe would be made with what we call baby carrots. Baby carrots are little tiny carrots about this big. They're kind of like, they're called snub-nosed carrots, and they're incredibly sweet. Well, carrots are sweet in their own nature, but in America, where we grow and we actually produce what's called a baby carrot, they are really, really sweet naturally. Most foods, when you harvest carrots or any other types of fruits or vegetables young, they tend to be a lot sweeter when they are first pulled before they actually come to maturity. And in the case of baby carrots, we're substituting those just for regular carrots, which will work just as good. We're going to put our carrots here inside of our pot. We're going to cover those just barely with a bit of water. Okay. And again, we are going to add just a tiny bit of salt to the carrots. And I'm thirsty, so I'm going to have some of this really wonderful Aqua Giulia water, because this is all we buy and use for home. And it really tastes wonderful. Okay, so now that we got our carrots going here, and we have our potatoes prepared, what we're going to do is have these haven't started boiling yet. So you want to add about 5 garlic heads for the potatoes, because we're making creamy garlic potatoes. And typically, you could do this with garlic powder. But in this case, we're actually going to infuse the potatoes with the garlic. So I'm going to take my garlic heads here, kind of take these green tips off of them. Okay. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to we're not going to chop these, because these are going to soften up when they boil, okay? All we're going to do is we're just going to open them up a little bit to let those flavors out. So we open them up here, okay? Now we're going to take these garlic and we're going to put them right into our potatoes. Now these are going to boil down, and when these boil down and get really soft, the potatoes and the garlic will both fuse together. And since I put the salt in there, I'm going to stir it up a little bit just to make sure that that salt gets distributed evenly. Now, mashed potatoes is a very, very common thing in the United States. There are thousands of reasons why we eat potatoes in the United States, but one of the reasons is that potatoes are so widely available. Whenever there's a bad season crop of any other kind of fruits or vegetables that come out for a season basis, if a crop comes out bad, it's almost never that you have a bad potato crop. So there are tens of thousands of potato recipes, and everyone eats potatoes all around the world. And one of the, oops, I see I didn't turn on the carrots here. Let's get our carrots going. Okay, now we got our carrots going. One of the things that are great about potatoes is that you can make so many things with them. And it's absolutely amazing how many things you can make with potatoes. I mean, unbelievable amounts of things. And over the next few episodes, we're going to talk more about potatoes and maybe even put some more potato recipes into our shows here. Very interesting, I learned something about potatoes. I guess that sometime in the past, even Avan Hoja said that the potato is not a food. It's something along the lines of it's a food and a bread. It's a potato and a bread. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant until I had someone explain it to me. And it absolutely made sense to me when we talked about it, because all around the world, I'm sure at some time in history, people have heard the same saying, okay? Whenever it's hard times, whenever you are down on your luck, you can always fall back on the potato. And the potato is a wonderful thing to cook. And we'll have lots more recipes for that on potatoes. Now that we've got our potatoes and our carrots cooking, we're going to work on our glaze that's going to go on top of our meatloaf. And our glaze that will go on top of our meatloaf consists of three things. The first thing is, where we go here, is our mustard. We're going to have a little bit of mustard, and we're going to have a little bit of ketchup, and we're going to have a little bit of honey, okay? And for this, we actually need about a tablespoon. Now grab my tablespoon. We need about a tablespoon of each, okay? And so what I'm going to do, we have our nice store-bought mustard from Conad here. We forgot to take off the top. And let's see if we did the same thing with the ketchup here. Oh, now I've got to take the one off for the ketchup too. Okay. And make sure we can get up. Okay. So now we're going to take about a tablespoon of mustard. Okay. Now, it's kind of interesting. You kind of tap it there and you can see that it actually comes out to be a little bit of a tablespoon of mustard. Okay. So we're going to get our tablespoon of mustard in there. And we're going to have just about a half. I got to open this up too. Okay, look at here. We've got a little bit going on here. Plastic didn't come off. Okay, very good. So now we've got our ketchup. And we're going to put about a tablespoon of ketchup to our mustard. And the real secret ingredient here, we're going to go over here. Oops, maybe not. The real secret ingredient here is the honey, because the honey is what's the sweet part of it. Now, honey's being used today in these recipes into our carrots as soon as our carrots are done. And the honey glaze will also go on top of the meatloaf. So now we're going to take about a half a tablespoon of honey, and it won't take much. Now, you can take your honey to make it more easily to work with, and you can take it and put it into a microwave, because it will soften it up and make it easier to pour out into your bowls. So 2 or 3 seconds in the microwave and you'll get it out of your spoon pretty quickly. And the best thing about honey is, it's great to eat by itself. Honey, great if you have a sore throat. Me and my wife eat honey all the time at home. So, now, we have these 3 ingredients that we have in our mixture. The real ingredient that makes this really special and really good is brown sugar. Now, here in Albania, you can find and buy brown sugar. What is brown sugar? Brown sugar is granulated sugar that has a molasses added to it to thicken it up, okay? And molasses is a syrup that you extract from a tree. And whenever you use brown sugar, it's typically used in baking recipes, but in America, we use brown sugar in every kind of recipe you can imagine. So, we bought this one from Conad, and this one's more of a granulated sugar, and you notice that you can kind of hear that it kind of sounds like it's regular sugar, okay? It even looks like it's regular sugar. Now, I just happened to find a place here in Tirana that actually imports brown sugar, okay, directly from America. And whether it actually come from America or it came from the UK, I don't know, but I was told it came from America. And we're actually gonna use this one because this one here is real brown sugar. It's called packed brown sugar. Packed brown sugar is real thick, real heavy, and when you shake it, you can't hear it, you can't hear any sound. The reason why packed brown sugar is better than using a granulated sugar is because it actually has 3 times more the molasses in it. And the 3 times more the molasses will actually seep out into the rest of the ingredients and help make it bind better. If you just take just regular brown sugar and use this, it won't bind. So this is what's sold here in Albania. Very good, nothing wrong with using it. But to make it more easily workable, we're going to use the brown sugar that actually come from the United States, and because this is a typical United States ingredient. So we're going to put about, now this is a half a teaspoon, and I'm going to do heaping teaspoons. A heaping teaspoon, okay, is where it's not level. It actually rolls. It makes a round portion on the top of the bowl. So that's called a heaping teaspoon. We're going to put about 4 heaping teaspoons, and this is actually a half a teaspoon. We're going to put about 4 of these, and the reason why we're doing that is because my other things are dirty right now, so we're going to set those aside here in our kitchen. Now, the next thing we need to do is mix this up. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix this up here and get this, and we're going to set this aside. But before I finish that, I'm going to check on my potatoes here, and it looks like my potatoes are getting ready to start boiling. Wonderful to cook on gas. If you don't have a gas stove inside your home, I recommend having a gas stove. Not only do you cook quicker, it's more efficient. Okay, so right now, I'm saying we probably need about another 10-15 minutes for this to boil. And let's see, I think we have, yeah, they're pretty good. Right now, it usually takes about 20-25 minutes to get them to boiling, to get them really soft to make mashed potatoes. Right now, we got about another 10 or 15 minutes to get them to that point. Now, the carrots usually take about 15 to 20 minutes to just soften up. You don't want them completely soft because mushy carrots, the whole point of eating a carrot is that it's crunchy, it's fun, fun to eat, you know. So what you want to do is not let these carrots get too soft, because we have a second step in the recipe where once these are cooked, halfway cooked, we're going to drain these and we're going to add the honey and the mustard and the thyme to this, and then we're going to let it glaze over. Okay, these look pretty good. So the reason why, now I'm going back over here and I'm going to finish mixing my glaze up that we're going to put on top of our meatloaf, and then we're just going to kind of set this aside until it's time to put this glaze on the meatloaf. I kind of chose these recipes today for this show because these are very typical American everyday recipes. And in the United States, when you live busy, hectic lives, you have to be able to cook things that are quick. You have to be able to cook things that are nutritious for your family, your kids. And this is just one of the types of recipes that you would find on a weekly basis on just about any household in America. That tastes real good. I can see all the guys in the studio here are just wondering what this tastes like, and they can't wait to get their hands on it. But that tastes really, really good. You gotta love mustard and brown sugar, I tell you. So we're gonna set this aside. And for right now, it looks like our carrots are getting a nice good boil going on here. And we're just going to check on our potatoes. Okay. Now, a little bit of history. Some of these ingredients that we're using today are the most basic ingredients that you use on just about any continent on this planet. We actually have oregano and basil to be universally known in every country. You have every culture around the world that uses these types of seasonings. But the one secret that's kind of really fascinated me when I first came to Albania, that one of the ingredients that we use in the United States is a combination of ingredients that is bought commercially. You can walk into a store and buy it in a jar that's got mixed seasonings, and it's called Italian seasoning. And when I first came to Albania, I couldn't find Italian seasoning. I couldn't find it anywhere in the country. Very strange. And then I asked people, have you heard of Italian seasoning? Have you worked with Italian seasoning? Have you used it in your cooking? Nobody knew what it was. So, when it comes to cooking, what I cook from the United States and being able to cook American food inside of Albania, I had to be able to make Italian seasoning from scratch. So, the basic ingredients of making Italian seasoning from scratch is taking 5 equal portions of oregano, margarine, thyme, basil, and I also use tarragon in mine because tarragon is one of my favorite seasonings that we use. And you mix these up in equal portions, and that actually makes Italian seasoning. Now, I did a little research on this, and I found out that Italian seasoning, although it's called Italian seasoning in the United States, it's not called Italian seasoning in Europe. And it has its origins here in the Mediterranean. It actually was born out of the Greeks and the Romans hundreds of years ago. And all of these seasonings combined together make Italian seasoning. But all of these seasonings made its way to America. And it wasn't until it got to America that all of these seasonings combined together actually became Italian seasoning. Now, I'm from Chicago. Now, in Chicago, we actually have so many different cuisines. Everything, every cuisine of the world is in Chicago. We have Italian, Chinese, Polish, German, British, Thai, Mexican, Colombian, Peruvian. Every type of influence of seasonings and recipes and mixtures, and they all kind of fit together and all work together. These recipes here are very traditional American recipes. There's nothing unusual about these recipes when it comes to if this is something you would actually make in your home. These are normal foods that you would eat on a daily basis. We all love carrots. Everyone eats carrots. We all love potatoes. It's just the twisting of the recipes a little bit, the different ingredients that we use in the United States that make it incredibly unique. So I'm going to let this finish here. We have our potatoes boiling, and we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to get our potatoes and our carrots going, and we're a few minutes away from putting our glaze on our meatloaf, and when we come back, we're going to finish all these up. Okay, we're back, and everything is looking pretty good here. Our carrots are just about taut enough that they're not soft. They're cooked, but they're not mushy. And we've got our potatoes boiling really hard, and they're ready to come off and to start making our mashed potatoes. And we're going to take a quick peek here at our meatloaf, and it looks like our meatloaf is doing real good. So, the next thing we're going to do is, now that our carrots have softened slightly, not cooked all the way through, like I said, you want them to be a little bit crunchy. We're going to take our carrots off of our stove here, and we're going to drain out the juices. carrots still left in the bottom there. And we're going to put our carrots back inside our pot. I think we kind of missed one there. Well, he's all right. He can stay there. Now, we're going to turn this off for a moment. And now that we have our carrots back in our pot, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of butter. Now, the butter is mostly for flavor. Now, a tablespoon of butter is usually about 10 millimeters thick, about a centimeter thick, and kind of like, you know, sit it in you can feel it in the palm of your hand. So we're going to take 1, and we're going to take 2, and we're going to put that in there. The next thing we're going to add to this is we're going to add some honey. So we're also going to this is very much the secret ingredient, and I'm going to use a teaspoon for measuring, and I'm going to put 2 teaspoons of honey inside of our pot here. And it's good honey too, because I got to tell you, it's thick. I have been using this honey since I've been in this Morova, since I've been in Albania, and it is absolutely wonderful. Now that we got our butter and our honey inside there, now we're going to add a little bit of brown sugar. Now, the honey and the brown sugar is going to mix, and it's going to make a glaze. The butter is going to help pull all of that together and make it glaze over. So I'm going to do this just by my hand, and I'm going to put about a couple of fingerfuls, okay, in there. And what I'm going to do is turn my stove back on, and we're going to turn it on low. We want it on medium-low heat, as you can see. We don't want to cook this hard because it's going to cook slowly. And we want to mix this up so that the butter and the honey coat these carrots really nicely. Now, the last ingredient to go into this is going to be a little bit of thyme. And you can just do a couple of shakes. You can put a little bit in your hand. It doesn't take much, just a tiny bit in your hand. Put in there, and I'm going to do 2, which is less than a half a teaspoon. And we're going to mix that up in there because the thyme and the honey and the butter is going to infuse these carrots. And now this portion only takes about 5 or 6 minutes on medium-low heat. And what you want to do is just let it cook slowly, and it'll start to turn thick, and it'll turn into a nice glaze. Now, while we're letting our carrots finish up there, we're going to get to our potatoes. Now, we're going to take our potatoes over here to our strainer. Get my carrot out of here. Oops, okay, well, we're going to have a carrot in our potatoes there. And we're going to strain out our potatoes. Okay? Now, you don't have to blanch these in water because we want these to stay hot because they're going to be mushy. So we're going to get our potatoes back into our pot here. Now, you could do this inside of another bowl. I like to do it in the same pot because the pot is still hot and you want to keep the pot warm. So now we have our potatoes in our pot here. And what we're going to add to it, we're going to add butter, and we're going to add some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Now, Parmesan cheese is kind of the main ingredient to this. Now, we already have our garlic inside the potatoes. Now, a normal mashed potato dish wouldn't have garlic, so this is kind of a special dish. So, we have our garlic that's already inside. It's mushy. It's going to get mushed up with the potatoes when we mix it. And the only other left ingredients we need to add is our butter, our Parmesan cheese, and we're going to add some milk. In this case, we're going to use some milk we bought from Conad. And the best milk is to use whole milk because it has a better consistency. But we find that this actually works just as good. So We're going to do the same thing like we did before. We're going to take 2 tablespoons of butter, put inside of our potatoes here. And we're going to use about, in the beginning, we're going to use about a half a cup of milk. And as you can see, this is a half a cup serving. If you don't have these type of measuring spoons in your home, I highly recommend you run out and grab some, because it's incredibly difficult to work without being able to measure certain things. Now, we used 6 potatoes on this. Okay, and then the next ingredient is going to be our milk. And we're going to measure out about a half a cup here into, ooh, it's a little messy. We're going to measure out about a half a cup of milk into our potatoes. I'm going to put it on there like that. Now, well, 9 times out of 10, we will end up adding more milk to the recipe. But for now, we want to start off with an even half a cup. Okay, before we start mixing, we want to go in and we want to add a tiny bit of salt to it. Now, if you're using salted butter, and it's heavily salted, then you don't have to add salt. Most of the butters that we find in Albania, they're unsalted, so you need to add a little bit of salt to it. So we're going to add just a pinch of salt here. And we're going to do some black pepper. Where's my black pepper at? I'm going to get some black pepper in here. Boy, those carrots are starting to look good. In fact, before I even do this, we're going to stir our carrots here. Now you can see that the carrots are starting to form a glaze. Now it's not real heavy yet. If you want it to be really thick, you can use a little bit more butter and a little bit more brown sugar. But in this case, we just want it to be a light glaze. So now we have our carrots starting to glaze. Oh, it smells so good. Holy crap. Woo. Okay, so now, mixer. I don't know how many Albanians have a handheld electric mixer in their home, but in the American home, there's not a single American home that doesn't have one. This is as universal as having a microwave or drinking water. So even just for this show, we had to run out and buy one because it's not something that's very typically used in Albania. We're going to use an electric mixer, and we're going to cream our potatoes. So we're going to get this in here. Now, the point of using a handheld electric mixer is that you can control by hand how much of the potatoes are actually being emulsified. Some people in America, they actually don't like them completely creamy. They leave it a little chunky. In this case, we're going to make it creamy. And it's mostly because I just love to do it. This is absolutely one of my favorite dishes. And it's something that would be put on every dinner table if I had my say-so. Okay, now we've got our potatoes creamed up pretty good. We're going to add our last ingredient. And the last ingredient, okay, is our fresh Parmesan cheese. And we want to take our Parmesan cheese. Now, when you have finely grated Parmesan cheese and you are mixing the potatoes inside the pot that you cooked them in, the Parmesan cheese will emulsify and actually melt down into the potatoes. And that's kind of what I'm looking for here, because I don't want the Parmesan cheese sticking out like a sore thumb or something. So we're going to get our Parmesan cheese in there, and we're going to go back to mixing. Now, in this particular mashed potatoes, you can see that the mashed potatoes are incredibly fluffy, and this is the consistency that we're looking for. And what you really want to do is leave them fluffy, okay, as fluffy as you can get them, because that's going to be the luscious and incredibly soft taste on your tongue. Now, the best part of cooking is doing the taste test. And I get to do the taste test a lot. So, we're gonna try these mashed potatoes here. That is perfect. Perfect amount of salt, perfect amount of pepper. You can taste the garlic. The garlic flows through all the mashed potatoes. And, I can't help it. I have one bite, I gotta have 2 or 3 different bites. Okay, so our mashed potatoes are done. I'm gonna let them sit here on the stove because they'll stay warm in the pot. I'm gonna check on my carrots one more time. See how my glaze is going. Oh, that's starting to smell good. That is starting to smell really good. Now, I might actually cook these a little bit longer because the carrots are done, but we want the carrots to have that nice, beautiful, hard glaze. Just not too thick, just a nice hard glaze. So, we've prepared so far up to this point. We have our mashed potatoes completed, and our carrots are almost finished. And now we're going to go to the oven and check on our meatloaf. And it looks as if our meatloaf is ready to have our glaze put on it. So, let's see, where are my mitts for my oven? Let's grab my mitts for the oven. We're going to pull this out of the oven, make a little bit of space here so we can work. And get our glaze going. Oh boy, look at this. Look at that. Oh. It's not even completely done yet, and it smells great. Okay. Now the glaze in this particular recipe is a topping. The topping is to infuse the top of the meatloaf with a tiny bit of flavor. There's flavor that's been infused into the meatloaf with all of the seasonings, but the topping is kind of like a sweet topping. Now, in the United States, all of our foods, we love sweet food, period. We cannot stay away from sweet food. And we infuse sweet, if we can find a way to put something sweet on top of a piece of meat, we're going to do it. So, in this particular recipe, we're going to get our glaze, and we're just going to pour it slightly across the top of the meatloaf. Now, at this point, the meatloaf has cooked for about 30 minutes, and we got about 30 more minutes of cook time on them. I don't want to waste any of that glaze, so I'm going to make sure it all gets on there. And you can see that the glaze will drip across the sides and across the top. Okay, now that we have our glaze on our meatloaf, we're going to get it back in the oven. Now you notice what I said before in the beginning of the show, that I didn't want to have the meatloaf touch the edges. And you can see, if the camera can get in there, you can see that the meatloaf has stayed in its form and its shape, and it hasn't fallen or dropped. And on the bottom of this, when this is fully cooked, the natural juices of the meatloaf are actually going to blacken the bottom of this meatloaf. And that's kind of what we're looking for here. Let's see, let's get our oven open. Let's get our meatloaf back in the oven. Okay. Oh, God, that smells good. Okay. Now, we got about 30 more minutes of cook time on our meatloaf. And while that's going, we've only got about a few more minutes of cook time on our carrots here. Now, in preparation time, you can obviously start your potatoes and your carrots 30 minutes before you know the meat's going to be done, because these things actually cook quick. But most people, I have learned, which is another oddity I've learned about Albania, most Albanians don't really enjoy foods that are hot. And in America, we serve everything warm, right out of the oven, right on the table, eat it hot. So one of the things that I've noticed that is when you're cooking for an Albanian audience, you need to kind of prepare your food in advance and let it cool down a little bit, because it's kind of like a culture shock to Albanians. So it looks like our carrots are done here. We're gonna turn this off, and we're gonna get us a nice serving dish. And maybe clean off the top of our counter just a tiny bit so that we don't get this too dirty. Open up a little bit of space here. Okay. And we're going to get our carrots inside of our dish here. Now, all the juices that are inside the pan, you let them flow right into the serving dish, because you want your carrots to keep that glaze all the way up in time you're going to put it in your mouth. Okay, there is our carrot dish. And I'm going to wipe off my spoon here. Getting pretty close to being ready. Now we're going to take our mashed potatoes. And we're going to just put our mashed potatoes in our serving dish. Just kind of dump it all in there. Now, them being nice and creamy, they'll kind of fill up the dish really, really nicely. Now, one of the reasons why all of the portions that are made in America look so huge is because, well, just like Albania, we have lots and lots of large families. Maybe not so much as nowadays, but it's something that's in the culture that has been passed along for decades and generations, that we actually make large portions in meals. One of those reasons is because of variety of food. The variety and the selections of foods, you can walk into any store in America and you can find 1,000 different vegetables, 1,000 different seasonings. And it kind of built into our culture. That we just love to cook. We love to cook. So we cook so much, we tend to overcook, okay? There's nothing wrong with overcooking. It's admiration, how much you eat at one time. That's another reason why we love leftovers so much. So here are our mashed potatoes, and here are our carrots. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a few sprigs of parsley and add to my carrots here, okay? Gives it a little bit of color, gives it a really nice contrast there. And I'm actually going to take a little bit of parsley and add it on top of my potatoes to make a nice presentation to the family at the table. Okay. And on top, the finishing touch on top of the carrots is that we're going to just sprinkle a tiny, tiny bit of thyme. So, to do this, I'm just going to put just a tiny bit in my hand. I'm just going to put a tiny bit in my hand. Can you see that there? And I'm just going to sprinkle it across the top a little bit. Just across the top, if I don't make too much of a mess. Okay? And that fresh thyme on top of the carrots will help bring out the rest of the flavors, and you'll feel like you have a really good time. So, we're going to take a moment, we could take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to check on our meatloaf and get it out of the oven, and we'll be ready to eat American style tonight. Be back in a moment. Hi, welcome back. I believe that our meatloaf is done. Let's go take a look. Okay, and it's got a nice, beautiful color on top. I think that we can pull this out of here now. Oh, smell that. That smells wonderful. Look at that beautiful meatloaf. Now you can see that all of the fat and the juices, okay, all came out of the meatloaf. It's all sitting around. Now, in this particular meatloaf, I have a very funny suspicion that it had a little bit more fat in it than I would normally see, because there's actually a lot of juices around the meatloaf. But nonetheless, it smells wonderful. Now, let's do the real test. Let's get ourselves a plate here. Okay, let's see, do I have a... I don't have a... Okay, we're gonna have to let it sit. You know what, we'll sit it right here. I think we're gonna be all right. We're gonna cut this meatloaf. Now, typically, you'd like to let the meatloaf sit for about 10 or 15 minutes out of the oven, because you want it to rest before you cut it. In this particular case, because of time, we're gonna actually put in a few cuts here to the meatloaf and check to see how it has cooked up. Oh, God. Look at this. It's beautiful. I don't think that you could get a piece of meatloaf to come out any better. There you go. Good piece of meatloaf. Now, you see how on the bottom of the meatloaf we got this little bit of blackness that formed? Well, that little bit of blackness actually has a lot of flavor in it. Now, it didn't quite, in this particular case, it didn't quite get as black as I'd like it to, but nonetheless, that little bit of black is there and it's very flavorful. You're gonna love it. So we're gonna take our potatoes here, get ourselves a little bit of potatoes on the side. Now, if you have kids at home, I guarantee you, they're gonna want 3 times as much potatoes, because kids love potatoes. And when I tell you they'll love these, they will love these potatoes. And our next thing we're gonna get here is a little bit of our carrots. And they're gonna go on the side here. Also something else the kids love. And we're gonna put a tiny bit on the side. And that's about the most beautiful portion that you could find. Absolutely beautiful. And if you really want to make the kids happy, put a little bit of parsley on top of that, and put another little piece of parsley on the top that you're going to give to the kids. And they're going to say, "Mom, Dad, look, what did you do?" Okay, so what did we make today? We made the typical American dinner. We made a meatloaf, okay, that consisted of a mix of spices and blends made with basil and oregano, tarragon, a little bit of marjoram. We put a little bit of to condense it up and get it to form together. We put a little bit of crushed breadcrumbs, and we used some eggs to make it combine together. And in our mashed potatoes here, these are not the typical mashed potatoes. They're a little bit more spiced up mashed potatoes. These mashed potatoes are creamy garlic mashed potatoes with Parmesan cheese added. And our carrots is a carrot glaze with honey and butter and thyme. And if you absolutely don't enjoy this, then don't go to America, because this is American. I'm trying to bring it to you to let you enjoy it. So, hope you enjoyed it. I hope you go to your kitchens right now, get this going, get a recipe on the table, and get something cooking. We'll see you next time, and bye-bye. Mir Pashem.